This is the beginning of a new story, of a glimpse of the story of Abu Ayyub Al-anshari radiallahu anhu. Who doesn't know Abu Ayyub Al-anshari? Everybody knows him. Now, from the very far east to the very far west. Everybody ever heard of the name of Abu Ayyub Al-anshari. But that was actually his nickname. That was not his actual name. For his actual name is actually Khalid ibn Zayd ibn Kulayb Al-Ansari. So his nickname is Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari, and he is from the tribe of An-Najjar, and that is a tribe, one of the tribe of the Ansar. And so Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari was lifted in the ranks by Allah Azza wa Jal, given the blessing of hosting the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he first migrated from Mecca to Medina. And so when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam migrated from Mecca to Medina, when he first reached the outskirt of Medina, okay, we say the outskirt of Medina, he stayed at a place called Quba, where the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, they built the first masjid in Islam, that was Masjid Quba, and also held the first congregational prayer, the first Salatul Jama'ah in Islam. Alaniyatan means openly, because previously in Medina, in Mecca, they were doing everything in discreet. But in Medina, in Masjid Quba, it was the first masjid in Islam and the first congregational prayer, first Salatul Jama'ah, done openly. And so Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam built the masjid along with his companions, stayed there for about 4 days, and then he continued his journey to Medina. So Quba was the outskirt of Medina. It's around 2 miles away from Medina, from Masjid Nabawi. Okay, about 2 miles away. So along the way, all the leaders of Ansar wanted the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, eagerly wanting him to be their guest, to stay at their place, and they will prepare everything. Now, the Prophet want to stay for how long? Doesn't matter. They will prepare all the necessary preparation in terms of food, in terms of lodging, and even to prevent any harm from anybody who wants to harm the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They are ready. And so everybody were like fighting with each other. They were fighting amongst them. They want to host the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But then the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, let the camel be. Okay, let the camel be. Because the Prophet was riding a camel by the name of Al-Qaswa. And so the Prophet said, let the camel be, فَإِنَّهَا مَأْمُورًا. For the camel was told by Allah Azza wa Jal where to stop. The pinpoint location of where it was meant to be has been instructed by Allah the Almighty. Okay, upon the camel. And so the camel roam and roam and roam, walk and walk and walk, and passing by many houses. All the people of any house that the camel passed by were saddened by the passing by of that camel. They were sad because they know that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was not going to stay at their place. But then the following houses, they were filled with hope. They are like still hoping, the camel passed by that brother's house. Maybe the camel is going to stop at my house. They are all hoping, eagerly hoping. And so, as the camel passed by all the houses, all the people are still following behind the camel, tracking the footsteps of the camel, following it, eager, wanting to know who would be the fortunate Sahaba who will be hosting the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so they followed and followed and followed, until the camel stopped at that open area by the house of a companion Abu Ayyub Al-Anshari. And so the camel then barakat. It sit. It sat down. But yet still the Prophet ﷺ did not move. He stayed on the camel. What happened? The camel actually stood up and went to another direction, but only to return back to the same exact location that it first sat. So it's a double confirm. So it first sat, and then it stood up, went, and then came back to that spot again. And so then everybody knew that Abu Ayyub Al-Anshari was the person to host the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Abu Ayyub yurahibu, he welcomed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He collected and lifted and carried the belongings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the camel to his house, as though he is carrying the treasures of the world, as though he is carrying the treasures of the whole world. Whereas we all know the belongings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very humble, very minimum. So that was just the preface, the beginning of the story of how Abu Ayyub Al-Anshari was hosting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because there is a continuity to this story. There is a detailed story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanting to stay on the first floor, and then Abu Ayyub was staying on the second floor, and then there was story in between between the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari. And that is for our next session, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala.